Okay, so in this part of the video, this one is pretty easy. So it's for decimals that to turn a decimal into a percent and a percent to a decimal, and this one is fairly simple. So for decimals to percent, you just need to move the decimal over 2 places to the right, or which is the same thing as multiplying by 100. Okay, so 0 and 48 hundredths. To turn that into a percent, all you need to do is move the decimal over 2 places to the right, and you're left with 48%, which is the same thing as multiplying it by 100. So if I multiply 100 times 48 hundredths, I am left with 0 times 8 times 0, 8 times 0, and 8. 0 times 4, 0 times 4, 4 times 1, left with 48. Count how many decimal place values, and there you go. It's the same thing, but obviously this one is more efficient. You just move the the decimal 2 places to the right. So same thing here. If I move the decimal, so 0 and 8 hundredths, move the decimal 2 places to the right, I am left with 8%. My percents look very funny today, but that's okay. Alright, so now I have 2 and 56 hundredths. Okay, so you see here, there is a whole number. So you already know that this percentage is not going to it's going to be over 100. Okay, over 100%. And since there's a 2 there, it's going to be over 200%. So I want to see if you can do this on your own. So pause this video and try doing this on your own, then unpause the video to check your answer. Okay, so you should have done this on your own. So if you just move the 2 decimal places over to the right, you should have gotten 256%. Okay, so that's our percentage, which is more than 100%. It's actually more than 200%. We have 256%, which is possible. It's not a trick question. You can have more than 100%. Okay, that just means that something is very likely, or it's extra credit maybe, but you can have percentages that are more than 100%. Okay, now for percents to decimals, okay, it's almost the same thing as decimals to percent, but with percent to decimals, you need to move the decimal over 2 places, and if you're doing it decimals to percent and you have to move it to the right, percent to decimal means you just move it to the left. It's the opposite, which is the same thing as dividing by 100. Okay, so 97%. Okay, so we have 97, and then the decimal would be here, because with all whole numbers, there's always a decimal there. But I've said this before, it's like when you have money, you don't say sometimes people will say I have $1.00. Okay, some people do say that. But there's always a decimal behind the whole number. We don't always put the decimal there. We don't put decimal 00 because there's no point. We already know that that's the whole number, right? Because there's no decimal, there's nothing behind the decimal. So there's always going to be a decimal behind any whole number. So all we need to do is we take that decimal and move it 2 places to the left, which is the same thing as dividing by 100. So if you move it 2 places, but obviously if you want to go through the trouble of dividing it by 100, you can, but it's the same thing as just moving the decimals 2 places to the left. So it's 0 and 97 hundredths. Okay, same thing here. 9%. We have 9 and our decimals here. Move it over 2 places to the left, and it is 0 and 9 hundredths. Okay, I'm gonna skip this one for now, and I want us to go over this one. So this is a decimal percent, which you can also have. You can also have a decimal as a percentage. It just means it's 0.5 out of 100. Okay, or sorry for the improper say, it's 5/10 over 100. Okay, so for this one, it's the same deal. You just have to move the decimal over 2 places to the left. Okay, so the decimal's already there. The decimal's in front of the 5. So we have to move it 2 places to the left, which means we're going to have a 0 here and another 0 here. So we're left with 5 hundredths. Or not hundreds, sorry. It's in the third place because this is tenths, this is hundredths, this is thousandths. So I apologize. It is 0 and 5 thousandths. Okay, so that's our decimal. Okay, so for this one, I want you to try to do this one on your own. And again, it is 125%, meaning it is greater than 100%. So you already know you're going to have one whole in there. Okay, so go ahead and turn this into a decimal. Pause this video, do it on your own, unpause it to check your answer. Okay, so 125%, the decimal's right here, move it over 2 places to the left, and you should get 1 and 25 hundredths. Okay, so that's your whole. You have your one whole and 25 hundredths. And it's, if you remember, 125%, we had 1 and, sorry, I had 2 separate pieces of paper. Where did it go? If you remember, on our other piece of paper, on the other side, so you should just be able to flip yours over. When we had 125%, we had 125 over 100, and it was 1 and 25 hundredths, or 1 and 1/4. So here you go. We have 1 and 25 hundredths. Okay, so same thing, 1 and 25 hundredths. Fractions, decimals, and percentages, all related to each other. Okay, now we're going to go over this. So for some of you, going through all of these steps, trying to convert the decimals into the fractions to percent, percent to fractions, decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals, is a bit tedious. But once you get into the practice, once you master those skills, you'll start remembering really common fractions, percentages, and decimals. So this is kind of a quick overview of some common fractions, percentages, and decimals to remember. Okay, so for 1/4, we're going to give you a visual for all of these fractions. So for 1/4, we have our pizza here. Okay, and then you shade it in, and so that's 1/4. Now to turn it into a decimal, you divide the numerator by the denominator. So 4 divided by 1, put a decimal, add a 0. 4 goes into 10 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. Add a 0. 4 goes into 20 5 times. So we're left with 0 and 25 hundredths. Okay? Now to turn that to a percent, we just got to multiply by 100, or it's the same thing as moving the decimal over to the right 2 place values, which equals 25%. And some of you already know this. 1/4 is always going to be 25%, or a quarter, okay? And if you forget, think about it. What is a quarter of a dollar? I just said it. It's quarter. It's 25. A quarter is worth 25 cents. So if I ask you what is 1/4 of a dollar, or what's 1/4 of a dollar, you will automatically know, okay, well, a quarter of a dollar is a quarter. So it's 25%. It's 25. Okay, and I even put it here. So in decimal, always relate decimals back to money. It makes it easier because we all deal with money every single day, or almost every single day, and it's easy to think of decimals as money. So this is 25 cents basically, right? So 1/4, 25 cents, because 25 cents is 1/4 of a dollar. Okay, so what about half? So our visual, sorry, my hair is getting in the way. So we have our circle here, and then we cut it in half because we cut it into 2 pieces, and then only one piece is colored in because it's 1/2. It's half of something. So 1/2, if you turn that into a decimal, some of you already have memorized this and already know this. 2, so 1/2, so our numerator divided by our denominator, 1 divided by 2. 2 goes into 1, cannot do that, so you got to put a decimal, add a 0. 2 goes into 10, 5 times. 5 times 2 is 10. So we're left with 0 and 5/10. Or if you think in money terms, 50 cents, which is half of a dollar. Okay, so again, think of money. When you think half, what's the decimal? So what's half of a dollar? 50. It's 50 cents. So it's 0 and 5/10. Okay, same thing. If you don't have the 0 there, it's still 5/10. That's still half. Okay, so you always remember 5/10. That's half always. That's the fraction version of this decimal. Now, if you want to turn it into a percent, we just got to move our decimal over to the right 2 times, and you're left with 50%, because that is half. 50% is always going to be half. 50% is half of 100. Okay, so whenever I tell you what is half of a dollar? Oh, it's 50 cents. So automatically you would know if it's 50 cents, then it's 50%. Okay, same thing here. If it's 25 cents, it's 25%. Okay, now 3/4. Now this one is, so if you divide our pizza, and I always keep saying pizza because that's how I learned it, and that's how a lot of you probably learned it. We have a pizza here. We divide it into fourths because that's how many pieces it is divided into. So it's 4 parts. 4 parts makes 1 whole, and then we have to shade in 3 because it's 3/4. All right, and if you want to find the decimal version, you probably already know what it is. It's a numerator divided by the denominator, so 4 goes into 3. Can't do it, put a decimal, add the 0, 4 goes into 3, 7 times 4 is 28. 30 minus 28 is 2. Add a 0, 4 into 20 is 5. So 4 times 5 is 20, so, and then you subtract 20, so you're left with no more remainder. So you have 0 and 75 hundredths. Whew, sorry about that. Okay, so you're left with 0 and 75 hundredths. So now you have 75 hundredths. So if you move our decimal 2 places to the right, you're left with 75%. Now, another way to think of this, and this is how some of you might think of it, this is how I think of it whenever I'm doing when I'm doing some baking, like if I want 3/4 cup, I basically just take my 1/4 cup and multiply it 3 times. That's how I do it when I'm baking cookies or making a cake. They ask for 3/4 cup of flour, I just take my 1/4 cup and just multiply it by 3, because 3/4 is the same thing as saying 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, because it's just 1/4 multiplied 3 times. Or another way to think of it is 25%, 25%, 25%. Then you multiply 25 times 3 is, you guessed it, 75%. So that's it. So 1/4 is really a fraction and a decimal and a percentage to always remember. That's a good one to always remember, because you have 3/4 or you have 2/4, which is the same thing as 1/2, by the way, because 2/4 simplified is 1/2. Okay, so that's another way to think of it. 1/4 is 25%, 25%, 25%. Okay, for 1/10, so a visual of that. Oh no, I ran out of room. Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to draw my box here. I'm going to put 10 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay? And then I'm going to color it. So 10 parts makes up 1 whole. And then I'm going to color in 1 part, because it's 1/10. Okay? Just put my equal sign here. So 10 goes into, so if you want to turn to a decimal, it's the numerator divided by the denominator. So 10 goes into 1. The decimals, it's going to be a decimal, so 10 goes into 10 one time, right? So we're left with 0 and 1/10, which equals out to 10%, because if you move the decimal over 2 times, you're left with 10%. Now, 1/10 is also the same as saying 10 over 100. Okay, and something to note about 1/10. So let's say someone's asking you what's 20%. So that's the same thing as saying 2/10, because which equals out to 1/10 plus 1/10, or 10% plus 10%. Okay, so that all equals out to 20%. So if you remember 1/10 or 10%, that's a really easy way to remember 20, 30, 40, any percents that are going by tens. Okay, and again, go back to money. What is 1/10 of a dollar? It is 10 cents. Right here, 0 and 10, 0 and 1/10, which is 10, or, I'm sorry, it's 1/10, so it's 0 and 10 cents, or if you remove the 0, it's just 0 and 1/10, okay, which is all the same thing, and then equals out to 10%, okay? So these are some fractions and decimals and percentages to remember, because these are going to help you once you've mastered how to do all of this and all of this, fractions to percent, percent to fraction, decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals. These are really easy to remember, and then these will help you kind of be like your baseline fractions and percentages and decimals to remember, okay?